Welcome to Keeping the World Company on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Benjamin Davis, and today we'll talk about honestly, hasn't Ukraine already lost the war? It's lost 25% of its territory, and resupply from the West isn't easily forthcoming. So, we're going to take a look at that and some other things too. Our co host for the show is Tim Apicella, and our guest
Morning.
for the show is Jean Rosenfeld, an independent scholar. Hi, Jean. Everyone, welcome to the show. So, let me do a little bit of an intro. And I'm wearing my regalia from my college, like Lawrence O'Donnell did the other night because he was so proud of Harvard saying no. So, please bear with me for my clothes. But let's go and talk to Ukraine because Ukraine is definitely saying no to Russia. Okay. So Ukraine has to be one of the great post-war tragedies in Europe and represents the very real and intentional possibility of the end of Pax Americana and the end of NATO and the liberal world order. At this point, we should be following the events in Ukraine very carefully, even though there's lots of other things going on, since the result will have a profound and long lasting effect on American global interests and whether the Trump administration recognizes that or not. To you, Tim, you notice that Trump keeps on hitting on Zelensky and Ukraine, and the U.S. is no longer providing money or weapons. Do you think, the Ukraine's got a chance at all at this time?
I do think they have a chance. They have to win the propaganda war, which they're losing. And who's helping the propaganda war is Donald Trump. If I'm not mistaken, for a second time now, he has, repeated the Russian trope that Ukraine started the war. That's not helping win the war of hearts and minds when the President of the United States is saying that Ukraine started the war, knowing full well that's a lie and it's not the truth. And Zelensky is doing his best to set the record straight and say we are the victim. We are the ones who were attacked. I mean, these are simple facts. Yet Donald Trump is trying to confuse these simple facts with his propaganda and his lies, pro-Russia lies. And I
Mm.
find it disgusting that a president of the United States would do such a thing. But there you have it. It's Donald Trump.
I was looking, Gene, at a report I think yesterday, which was saying that the 30-day ceasefire proposal of President Trump has passed, and the hybrid war of Putin has been continuing all over Ukraine. And in fact, there may even be some Chinese troops there. So, do you think there's any really interest on the Russian side to do anything but continue trying to gain territory?
I'm not going to try to read Putin's mind, but we can look at some of the little bits of facts that are coming out. If indeed there are Chinese troops in Ukraine and there are no more North Korean troops, or at least no new ones coming in, and if there are mercenaries already who have emptied out the prisons in Russia, and people from the far corners of Central Asia are not sending people, we can deduce that Putin is having a power problem also.
Mm, mm, mm. So you think that Putin?
He,
Uh,
he-
I heard that he had called up another 160,000 for for drafting or something like that. There, so you think that that's his Achilles heel, so to speak, in this?
yes, because uh, the Russian, the main Russian Federation part of Russia that is not uh, the other peoples in Russia, so-called minorities and other nations. They don't want their sons drafted, and the young men of Russia don't want to be drafted. A lot of them have already left the country. I met one of them recently in Colorado, came to the United States on the pretense that he was going on vacation from Russia. He just kept on coming and wound up at the Mexican border. So uh, it's very unpopular. The war is very unpopular in Russia. That's what he told me. So
Uh-huh.
why Putin is reaching out. The other thing is, once he reaches out and he gets a contingent, say, of Chinese troops, he is obligated to pursue the war. He can't basically negotiate in good faith because, after all, he's got now an ally who is trusting him with their young people, and they want to see progress. And progress means winning. So he is committed. He's sort of between Scylla and Charybdis here.
Mhm.
And on the one hand, I think he really wants the war to come to an end because Russia is now spending 30 to 40% of its GDP on pursuing war and weapons. And they can't keep that up because Russia is not an economically strong country under the best of circumstances. Secondly, he's got a restive population if he continues to recruit from among his own people. And he doesn't know how long or how committed his allies will be to supporting him. So, on the one hand, he wants that war to end. On the other hand, he has got to secure a perception of winning. And it's telling to me that Trump, who was so invested in ending this war on day one and who pursued it from Putin's perspective alone, met up with a response from Zelensky that has somehow not allowed him to achieve that objective. And I don't know the reasons for this, but it looks like Zelensky is again playing his own cards here that Trump, of course, said he didn't have. And since the Ukrainian people are still standing up to the challenge on behalf of the Western world, which Trump has abandoned.
But that reminds me of a comment I heard that Zelensky had made recently when someone said that is America supporting him? He says he thinks the American people are supporting him, but he's not so sure about the American government, which is pretty significant, Tim. Right, for him to be so candid about something. What do you think?
Well, after J.D. Vance, Vice President Vance, and Trump dressed him down in the Oval Office, I think he's trying to be careful with his words. But the plain fact that he can't deny that Trump is really working against him, particularly when he's saying he's starting the war. Um, I don't know what Trump trying to accomplish with that. Uh, to further make Zelensky kowtow to him and pretend that maybe, well, if he said I did, I guess I did. This is crazy. And so, I think Zelensky's smart move is go back to Europe, to the EU, and say, okay, well, maybe we don't get the best and the most smart weapons, but maybe we get weapons that are better than Russia's weapons, and start there. Not worry about having the best and most effective weaponry, but get what Europe can give us so that we can stay in this battle and not get carved up like like the Christmas turkey, and end up with a loss of 25% of our country or more. Yeah, there's going to be a midpoint here. There's going to be some capitulation. That's what compromise is, and Putin, I don't think, is going to get everything he wants. I said on this show multiple times that in my heart's heart, I think it's the borders that were Crimea back in 2012. Go back to that, and then you have a buildup of military on both sides of the border, like South and North Korea. I don't know how that's all going to shake out, but I know one thing: Zelensky knows that if he just gives in now, he doesn't have a chance of retaining the country as he's hoping to keep it.
And going with the issue of sort of turning towards Europe, there's the former Soviet satellite, right? The Eastern European countries who certainly have a long history of dealing on one way towards Russia, on the other way it was towards Germany, right? And then there's the Western European. Do you think there's a split, Gene, between the Eastern Europeans with their memory and the Estonians and all those folks versus the Western Europeans' view of this, or you think they're kind of united in support of Ukraine?
So much East and West as it is North and South.
Okay.
The Northern Tier, the Scandinavian countries, the Baltic countries, Germany, particularly, and Poland, are most stalwart in support of Ukraine. Germany, because of its history of anti Semitism and oppression. The Eastern satellite countries, because they have been occupied by Russia, as well as Germany. And they have known oppression. There is a very fantastic museum of oppression and freedom fighters in Vilnius, Lithuania. And Lithuania was the first country, the first Soviet socialist republic, which, the Soviet Union actually incorporated it. It just didn't occupy it like
Hmm.
Poland. It
Hmm.
split up to Russia in the time of Gorbachev. They were the first ones to declare their independence within the Russian Empire. And
Hmm.
they adamantly anti-Russian, and they expelled a lot of Russians from within their own territory. So that's that northern tier. The southern tier is kind of the soft underbelly. You have, of course, Belarus is in the north, and it's part of the Soviet Union, not Soviet Union, but Russia. It was part of the Soviet Union, and along with Ukraine, Moscow considers it the ancient part of Russia. The three, Muscovy, Belarus, and Kiev in Ukraine, are ancient Russia, according to Putin, that he's trying to reclaim. But the South, you have Italy, for example, which has been supportive of Ukraine, even though it's a fascist government. I mean, generically fascist from Mussolini.
Hmm.
And then you have Spain, which is kind of, yeah, so so. And you have this soft underbelly of places that Russia is expanding into, like Moldova, where they may some of these countries may belong to NATO, but they aren't stalwart for Ukraine.
Would we add into them Hungary also with the sort of Orban approach?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, someone once said to me that, people have ideas, they create institutions like the European Union. The European Union has power, and then the question is the power for what? That was always a question. And so, do um, you have any optimism, Tim, that the Europeans will stand up with what they have to support Ukraine with the American vacuum, sort of?
Oh, absolutely, I do. I think they know it's in their best interest to do so. Again, they're going to have to start digging deep. That's going to affect their GDP in all these nations and in the EU. But they see the handwriting on the wall with Putin's aspirations and his desires to reformulate, the old Soviet Union. Again, I always say that Putin thinks he's the reincarnation of Peter the Great, and make Russia great again, and that includes all the northern countries like Finland and Sweden. Hey, they didn't become part of NATO for nothing. That was something they desperately wanted to do, and for good reason. So yes, I think Europe, it doesn't save the day, but it prolongs the war until everyone realizes that this is a deadly, horrific stalemate. And I think Zelensky's hoping for better terms if he can buy more time. And I don't know, whether he's also in a situation where his troop forces are dwindling, and so he's in a bit of a pickle that way, as is Russia.
If Europe does jump up and support much as it can, and if Zelensky is right about the American people's support, not necessarily what the government is, I wonder sort of what we can do as American people. Like, for example, I was at a demonstration at the University of Virginia recently where it was a demonstration support of that guy Mahmoud Khalil, who got picked up at Columbia, right? But there were people there who had Slava Ukrainia signs too. I mean, it was just like it was like this kind of merging of a whole series of issues coming together. And and I thought that was really beautiful that these people brought their Ukrainian flags, as part of saying, sort of a general sort of rejection of the overall approach that's there. Do you see any possibilities for that kind of unity inside the United States, Gene, to help turn the tide in favor, or maintain the tide, or push the tide in favor of Ukraine more in the United States and away from this certain Putin apologia?
Solidarity is a very important word today because it's the glue that binds people of different persuasions in opposition to something that they fear. And as it becomes apparent, as Trump consolidates power in terms of controlling information and knowledge within the United States, which we see him reaching down pretty far into the local populations to achieve this, even trying through a complicit Congress to pass laws regarding who can cross borders and the types of IDs that you need to cross borders, the bureaucracy you have to go through to get a real ID to get on an airplane, or how you can attest to the fact that you were born in the United States with different types of documents in order to vote before the 2026 elections. This type of control over information and freedom to move around is frightening everybody, regardless of their political ideologies in the United States. People from the far left to the far right who are not in agreement with Project 2025 and the MAGA crowd are finding common cause. Now, how do they bind themselves together? Well, with slogans, yes. I am actually reading a masterful propagandist's great manual. He was a Nazi propagandist, but he knew what propaganda was all about. And he talks about slogans. He talks about how words engage the emotions of people and how important this is. And so that's one way. You do it through the word, you do it through word of mouth. You do it by appearing together at a protest. People who haven't been out on the streets have gone out onto the streets. So this is building, but it's still, we're at the very bottom of this process. And yet, I heard Gary Kasparov this morning in an interview with Jen Rubin on Substack state that this is the time to strike for an opposition and a resistance movement, because the MAGA movement, which really is in charge of our government today, not the party, but the movement, has not yet consolidated its power. It doesn't have the army behind it to oppress the citizens yet. It doesn't have its own private army, even though it wants to employ more contractors, and it will. It doesn't have the cowed police departments to do its bidding in league with the Border Patrol. This is needed first. And while Trump is sometimes pausing and sometimes backing off, he's not letting go of his objectives. He's just building crescendo wise toward the consolidation of power and the creation and empowerment of a shadow state. And I have written about this recently because every fascist regime is going to have a shadow state where the power is and the force. And it's going to have kind of a regular civil state that looks like it's operating according to normal terms.
That's really getting us into sort of a dynamic we're living, right? Because I was just thinking that, you know, like Tim, we have the constitutional structure that we have that's in this country, and it's sort of we're all been used to it. But what we're maybe getting out of this Trump administration, going on the idea of the shadow state, is trying to put us into what's called a state of exception, where all the law no longer applies because it's an exceptional moment. Like I remember the first day I think he got into power, he called a emergency at the border, and then there's another emergency, and there's an energy emergency, and then now they've got the trade emergency. It's all emergency. So therefore, we have to act differently than what normal law requires. It seems like there's a battle going on inside us in this country between that push to create this sort of state of exception and those who are trying to stay within our constitutional framework that maybe is going on right now today. That's the battle on the ground right now. What do you think?
Well, yeah, and I'm still kind of thinking about the last question of, you saw the Ukrainian protests flags mixed in with those that are opposing cost of living and the lack of due process for immigration issues. And you're seeing Ukrainian flags. And I was a young lad, probably about 11 years old, and I remember very clearly to this day the videos or the TV coverage of protests in front of the White House and protests in the streets of New York and everywhere in the country. But they weren't just anti-war protests. You also had the farm workers of California in these movements. You had women's rights. You had their signage were in these movements, and you had civil rights, signage in these movements. So it was the coming together of all these movements that made one mass a sense of dissent. And I think that choose your topic, whether it's the lack of due process or it's the cost of living you're not happy with, or it's the fact that your 401k now is looking 40% lower than it was a month ago. Choose your topic, but show up. And by showing up, I think it helps. I don't know, maybe this is my theory, but it helps federal judges and the Supreme Court to come down with a decision that's easier to say we're going to defend the Constitution, and by gosh, we have these people in the street that say it's still worth defending and maintaining the rule of law. If no one shows up, I think it's harder for courts to challenge this dictator, would-be dictator named Donald Trump. But you get this synergy of protest, and it just helps, I think.
Thinking about slogans like you were talking about, Gene, and that master propagandist, I think on April 5th there were demonstrations all over the country, and I think the slogan was "hands off." And inside of "hands off," there was a wide variety of different issues that people were speaking to, but they were amassed all over the country. And then there's another one, which is, I think, let's think of. What is it? Bernie Sanders and AOC going around saying, "What is it? Fight the oligarchy." That sounds a kind of obscure. I don't know. It's a kind of obscure, but it's 34,000 people are showing up in Los Angeles. They get it. Something's going on. So this kind of solidarity, that beautiful word, that tough word to have. But do you think that the state is going to react to that? Putting in the old and Tim, you might remember this too. Also, the old agent provocateur and all that. The people who try to make it turn into a violent thing. Those kind of things. Gene, do you see that risk? Because we certainly saw that happen, didn't we?
If we continue to go down this road, which is so much like what has happened in the past. I mean, being a historian, that's what I do. I do comparison, right? And though history never repeats itself, it does give us paradigms, patterns of human behavior, because human beings from generation to generation are still, they still come with the same basic genetic equipment and are exposed to similar types of natural forces and respond in paradigmatic ways. And so, yes, there will be blood. That was the title of the movie that Daniel Day-Lewis made about the early capitalist in finding oil in California. And Lawrence O'Donnell borrowed that for one of his segments. Yes, there will be blood. And that phrase has been playing in my mind. Not saying violence is inevitable. No, of course it's not. You never know what types of leadership will emerge and what types of movements and ideologies will capture the public imagination. But we do know we are a well-armed nation. People are buying guns on all sides of the political spectrum. People are seeking bunkers. They're building bunkers. I mean, this is not a good sign. When you have polarization, dehumanization, and a regime that wants to be single-minded in its use of power and amass the actual organs of power, the armed forces, under its wing and compel them, you are heading for confrontation and disaster. It's still early. The more people stand up early and say no, those who never compromise, their moral autonomy. The more people who do that, the more likely we are not to have a disaster and a catastrophe and a coming apart at the seams.
As you were speaking, well, what came to my mind was the guy who threw the Molotov cocktails into the Governor Shapiro's the mansion that burned up the governor's mansion in Pennsylvania, right? I mean, is that just a symptom, or is it a precursor of what we might fear in terms of reaction? What do you think, Gene?
As a matter of fact, I know the guy who originated the lone wolf theory of terrorism. And
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. And one of my mentors was one of the great terrorism scholars who conceived of modern terrorism in waves of 40 years each. And the thought was that the fifth wave was going to be lone wolf terrorism. And we're still in that wave, and we are still getting lone wolves. And a lone wolf is someone who may be inspired by the internet, but acts alone and has his own idiosyncratic reason for doing what he's doing. They have a variety of reasons. But you saw this with the Pelosi attack on Paul Pelosi. You saw it in the baseball field on Steve Scalise, and it's happening more and more. The Whitmer threat was different; that was a group, but lone wolf terrorism still abounds, and yet is these people are excited by the fact that they're living in an age of high emotion, of propaganda, of polarization, and of people using who are taking away all the guidelines of how to speak and relate to one another. It's the it's the etiquette is the small ethics. When law breaks down, what do we have is a consensus of how to behave. When that breaks down, then civilization is at risk.
And do you think we are at risk here in the United States as a civilization right now,
I do.
Gene?
I
You
do.
do?
Yes, we are. Not to say that it's inevitable or that it's going to happen soon, but he's moving so fast, which is another aspect that makes this fascist, that there's rapid action through time, and they have to constantly stay in action. That is what sustains a fascist movement: action and emotion and power.
All of our work in solidarity is cut out for us in this time. We three are of a certain, how should I describe it, certain age. And do you feel certain kind of, I don't know, frustration about having to deal with this at this point in your life? You know, all this that's going on inside with Ukraine, or all these things that are going on in the States, with regards to this effort to push forward fascism. I mean, you know, I don't. I guess I'm raising this issue because it was a friend of mine said that he was really tired, that he has to deal with this when he just wants to retire. You know what I mean? He
Yeah,
just he just wants to live his life quietly after having worked 30, 40 years, whatever. And then it's like this stuff he's got to deal with. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, he wants to just take it easy, but he can't because it's so serious. You know what I mean?
I do, because there's a lot of people I know that just say, "Hey, you know what? I'm retired now. I just want to coast." Just like you said, I want to coast, and so I choose not to turn on the news. I don't want to know what's going on. Ignorance is bliss, and I could live in my little part of the country, and if I just don't pay attention to the news, I could live a peaceful life, and particularly if I'm surrounded people of like minds, be it red or blue. And so I think you still have that going on where people are burned out, they're apathetic, or they just don't want to take the battle on because they're at a certain point where I'm just pooped. I'm just tired of it all. Um, those, this is the time, no matter how tired you are, is the time to engage and resist. And if you really think about it, I keep going back to that speech President Obama made about progression. It's not linear. It's you're 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 4 steps forward, 3 steps back. So progression is never linear, and history is proof of that. We have advances in democracy, and then we have retractions. And unfortunately, we're in a horrible retraction period. And to Gene's point, history doesn't repeat itself, but as Mark Twain said, it often rhymes. And, and we're there. Where it's definitely rhyming. And these events, which we've been talking about for several years now, the dots are connecting, and they're connecting, as Gene pointed out correctly, in rapid fashion. And rapid fashion means fascism. So we can't afford to relax. I'm sorry. I know I live in Hawaii, and it's a great place to turn off the news and just enjoy. But we can't afford that. If you value democracy and what this country stood for 250 years. There are those in the civil rights movement that are still fighting and continue to fight, and they've made progression, but now they're taking maybe several steps back, either through hiring or education or just treatment. So it's a fight for all. I mean, I can't say that one sector of our country has to advance and the others could say, well, we'll just see how they do. We're all combined in this. We're all interconnected, and so it's all our fight.
This echoes something I saw Sherilyn Ifill talking about, is the next risk with regards to the Trump administration is sending Americans to that place like El Salvador. And the way it's framed, similar to what happened with the undocumented, is that we're going to take the worst of the worst that are in our prisons and send them. And she was saying that, to have a certain amount of empathy for people that you're not really supposed to be empathetic to, because they're horribly violent people, but they're still in prison, but they should still not be subjected, may be a hard reach for many of us, right? But it's an important reach in this time of solidarity here, to try to avoid getting to the point of so dehumanizing others.
I think that's why Trump has picked these sectors to focus on. The worst of the worst for criminals, and let's deport them without due process. He knows he has sympathy on that level, but what he didn't anticipate was the principle of due process. And even though his supporters, which I saw in front of in Iowa with Senator Grassley, I mean, he got an earful. And these weren't just paid libtards, filling up the room. These were definitely people from Iowa that lived in Iowa and probably voted for Trump. I mean, my God, they gave Grassley an earful, and what did they focus on? The illegality of not providing due process, even to someone they think might have been a M18 or M13 gang member. They saw the principle rather than the action. And I was impressed with that room not giving Grassley a moment of reprieve. I mean, they were on him.
Yeah, Gene, what do you think?
I was just going to say there's some points I don't want to get lost in this discussion that I've sort of saved that I want to focus on now.
Yeah.
Past is prologue to what is happening now. Let's look at where we're coming from. 9/11 started the war on terror. The war on terror, we crossed boundaries in that war. We used rendition of enemies to black sites in other countries. And what you're seeing Trump do now with rendering immigrants to El Salvador is a variation on that. We have not retreated from that policy with the war on terror waning. We have, in essence, institutionalized it or are in the process of normalizing it with this idea that you can house your prisoners in a foreign country of a state that is beholden to you. So that's one thing. The other thing is that in beefing up our border, we're militarizing it. And although there's a consensus that we have to do something about the mass influx of refugees and immigrants, the idea of building a fence and sending the military down to police the border is, again, a step toward totalitarianism, because now, as I was pointing out earlier, you need special documents to get on an airplane. More and more people coming from outside the United States inside are being delayed and detained, questioned, and surveilled. This is going to apply to people going outside of the United States, I'm afraid, also. On the one hand, if you have a government that only wants a uniform way of looking at the world and living in, in the society, you're going to want to weed out those people who are in opposition to that. You're going to want to render them somewhere else. But also, you're also going to want to prevent individuals coming back to this country that don't have the right attitude, who are of one mind. So watch, this is the shadow state building. And we've also, in our wars in Iraq and Kuwait, we have been using military contractors much more. And Eric Prince is still very active in seeking contracts from this government and was involved in trying to set up Guantanamo as a concentration camp. They were going to house 30,000 immigrants there. And they backed off, even though they sent people down there, spent taxpayer money, and started building. I wouldn't say that's off the charts. And they're still looking for contractors contracting out prisons in the United States to hold people. But it's much faster to make an agreement with Bukele, who's got these things already set up, than it is to, in the pure light of day, render people to Guantanamo or render them in concentration camps in Texas. So we have a shadow state here that is building, while it appears that things are not really so bad under the cover of the visible light, but they are.
When there are things in the shadows, what's the thing that always helps, right? Bringing light to it. And one of the things is the people who are in our government who believe in the oath that they take, who reveal things. I saw last night a mid-level executive, and I can't remember which department, who remarked that there was a lot of information from the National Labor Relations Board. He's a tech guy, was exfiltrated from their servers to Russian addresses. And he was there with his lawyer. And one of the reasons why he was there was, without changing his face or, covering his voice, to actually just be the person, because he said there are a lot of people who are fearful in the government. And he's trying to tell them, the water isn't as bad as you fear. Let people know, let it out, let us be aware of it, and they called for investigation from Congress on that. I just wanted to, Gene, you talked about the war on terror, and one of the things in the war on terror was a lot of use of technology with regards to like connecting the dots and all that stuff. And with these Doge people I noticed something interesting recently, which was that apparently Social Security numbers of people who are considered undocumented are being put into what's called the death file at Social Security, and about 6,100 names. And the consequence of that is you can't get a job, you can't have a bank account. I mean, there's all kinds of horrendous. So it's a kind of social death, okay, or financial murder, I think is what Martin O'Malley called it. Tim, these are people who are alive, okay, but they've just been transferred into the system to have a kind of social death. Shouldn't we maybe take a look at these tech folks a little more harshly than we have at this point as part of this solidarity? What do you think?
I think the media has done a fairly good job of pointing out Elon Musk and his, band of merry tech robbers, and showing the fallacy of, in the name of saving money and rooting out corruption and fraud and waste, that they've invaded the privacy of millions and millions of Americans, both Democrats and Republicans. And I think that people are on to Doge and their ultimate game, and they're not liking it. So I like to see that continue, that these people are being, the light is being put on Doge as for what they are, and that's invading databases and using that data for God knows what reasons. In the case of Social Security and putting them on the death list, and yeah, it's exponentially worse than what E-Verify was all set up to be with employers back in the 80s, which never took hold. But E-Verify was to do exactly that, is to prevent employment for someone who was not given a work permit or any kind of working visa. But yeah, to put them on the Social Security death list, everything stops for them. And it's a draconian way of getting to where Donald Trump wants to be.
One thought that came to mind as I was listening to you is I remembered it's a book. It's called IBM and the Holocaust. Edwin Black wrote it in 2001 about the first census the Nazis did in 33, and IBM with its new technology, right? You talk about AI today. This was the new technology then, which was card punch technology. I don't know if you remember
Oh
those
yeah.
cards we used to have, but back in the day, they weren't standardized. You had to figure out what was wanted for the client and you would make the card up. And IBM pitched that to the Nazis and got that census thing in 33. And with that, then you go with the card sorting machine, which is another part of this new thing. And you could get the lists because Edwin Black was always wondering, how did they get the lists? Well, today, using AI and all these technologies, maybe that's the way they're getting the lists, which is kind of chilling as the role of technology and who's supporting it or not. Anyway, I think I've gone about to our time limit here. So, Jean, you have any final thoughts?
We're in the springtime of a regime change. We have to act quickly because there's a blitzkrieg, and it is reaching down into every community in the United States, every business, every taxpayer, every every interaction you have with any kind of an office or an agency is going to be affected by this. Educational standards are falling. Kids are falling behind in school. It isn't just COVID. It's the whole uh, impact of a technological revolution where people are paying more attention to their screens than each other and communication is breaking down. This is all happening at the same time. And so we're heading for a big change. The shape of that change is going to depend on how we respond to what's happening now today out of our own sense of right and wrong. And if you listen to that inner monitor and you find like minded people to band together with, and you do something, say something, speak something, whether it's no or yes, in a consistent way and build solidarity, then those out of power can shape the change to come and also determine ultimately where that power resides.
Well said. Tim, any final thoughts for you?
I'm thinking the midterms are right around the corner. I know this administration just started. We're not even in the first 100 days, but I'm thinking of the next midterms and the Democratic Party finding a leadership that stands up to Donald Trump, but B, a message that goes back to those Americans that the Democratic Party lost in the last election and the election before that and the election before that. Getting back to bread and butter issues at the table and bringing them back into the Democratic Party. And if there's a slogan, it would be, "This is not what I voted for."
Wonderful.
And if and if everyone who's disgruntled, be it Republican, Independent, and GOP, remembers that slogan, maybe Donald Trump's power and influence is diminished greatly, even well before the midterms. That's hope springs eternal, but that's what I hope for.
Thank you both so much. You've given us so much to think about, and I hope that the people out there, having listened to this, will also think about the ideas that pop into their head based on the comments that were made here about what they can do. It may just be one thing, one small thing. It might even just be writing your congressman. If you really feel like doing something, you could go out on Saturday, April 19th. There are going to be demonstrations all around the country. I think there were millions on April 5th, and they're trying to get to 3 or 4 million this time around. And under the banner of hands off, whatever you want to have hands off, or this is not what I voted for, or solidarity, or whatever, you know, showing up and having those pictures shown to everyone that they are not alone, I think is an important thing. Also, just to speak to the undocumented or foreigners here, um, it is important that they understand that maybe you cannot speak, but we are with you. We are with you, and we want you to be treated decently because you've treated us decently so many times when we've been in your countries around the world. And we're going to find a way to stop the crazies, if I can say it like that. So, finishing with that, I'm Benjamin Davis. I'm thanking my guest, Jean Rosenfeld, my wonderful co-host, Tim Apicella. This has been Keeping the World Company. Started with Honestly, hasn't Ukraine already lost the war? Thanks to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha.